In this episode, I want to go along the camera calibrator and with all the options and parameters that it contains. It's a new tool. It's a very helpful tool, and to say it clearly, it's a fantastic tool. It helps us to find the camera that has taken one image, and with that re-engineered position of the camera, we can finally use this option then to project this image then on geometry. The geometry is not part of the camera calibrator, but we get all data that we need to know to start working on it. The other part is, of course, we could leave that image as it is, and in the moment we have a camera, we can place objects between camera and the image, and they behave then as if they would be inside of an image, even if we do not camera project this image then to geometry. So it's a huge opportunity to integrate an image data with 3D space here. Very, very intense. As I said before, I use this technology since the late 90s, and at that time we had to do this always by hand. There was no tracking software or any camera calibrator that helped us. That was always re-engineer the perspective with the horizon line, the vanishing points, and from there trial and error to get the camera. It took always time. And with this camera calibrator, it's fun even to do, and I can't stop doing these things because it's really fun. So when you have listened from the start, you might notice that we have talked about camera animations, and the path itself should be most likely very close or always to the cameras that the main object has in a scene. So now I hear you saying, oh, this picture I have seen before. Roughly, yes. And when I go here just to Photoshop for a moment, you can see that this picture here has two of these main rows of the windows. And then we have here already the third one, a little bit cropped, cut. And that's pretty much all we can see. And we would have the need to paint all these windows. And the truth is, in the moment I come with the camera closer to it, the perspective of all these details wouldn't work so nicely. So if I want, or if I have to use this image, I would have the need to cut always in these windows to get the parallax back from this, to get the perspective distortion out of the image based on a projection that follows along the picture with its geometry. Lots of work. I try to avoid this, of course, and I'm not really a friend of having too much geometry in it, because the geometry is most likely pretty sharp, even if I have bevels in it and all of that. An image has always a better quality, and if I go close with that, it's much better. So what I have here is just a little trial and error. I like to do those things before I even start, so I can see what happens here to the whole scene and if my idea works. So the second photo here was shot from this position. As you can see here, the camera. This is one camera, this is another camera, and we have one camera here. So lots of stuff here in the scene. And when you take a look, these two cameras have a distance. And I go now to bridge here to show you this was one image. And then we go down here to find the other one, this one here. And here you can see that we have tons of information more into it. And the camera goes here, of course, a little bit higher, but we have already a different perspective than this one. The lower picture comes closer to the perspective that we need for the final camera of that animation. And we have, of course, different versions here. I could even take something else, but I thought for this tutorial, the best idea is to go with these two guys. So let's start fresh from the scratch. And for the camera calibrator, we call up first the camera. So we have an object in the object manager, and then we can add the tag to it. Cinema 4D tags, camera calibrator. That is pretty much all we have to do. And then we have in the attributes manager, of course, the basics, the name, layer, if you want to place it on a name, and priority and all of that. This is pretty much standard. I don't go into details of that because that is something everyone should know who use cinema since a while. Then we have here the image tab. This is the first tab that you need to know. And we call in with the ellipses button the first image. So I call here the white image. You will see this in a second. I open that. Here it is inside and it loads into the view here directly. It's in front now. And that is our start point. We can check out if the film aspect ratio 1 to 1.5 is okay. 35 millimeters still, that's exactly what I have here inside, and the render is here in a ratio of 1 to 1.3. So when I change this, you will see that I change things here as well. So I put this here back to the standard, but we will see how much that might influence on the end anything. However, what we want to have is, of course, that we have an image inside. The image aspect ratio is known here, and the image scale here is set with 100%. Please leave it in that way. Image offset is given here with 0% and in the Y value also with 0%. The idea is normally that you take that image as it came from the camera. No cropping, nothing. It needs to be exactly in the way it is. And as we have discussed this, no lens distortion in it if there is any in it. We have here a checkbox that you can check on or off and you see the result, of course. And keep in foreground means if you have that in the foreground, anything in the scene is behind it. If it is unchecked, then anything in the scene is in the foreground. So very easy to understand. And the brightness is very important because if you have maybe some settings for that picture that doesn't work very well with you, you can change the brightness here. Has no influence to the later rendering. It's just for your convenience so you can see everything in a nice way. These three buttons gives you the full frame, match width and match high. So match high has an effect here at the moment, and you see that the image scale is moving with this. Is that important to know? At the moment I would think yes. I don't know if that will change after this tutorial, but I would certainly have an eye on this. And I want to show you that, of course, later on, because it's very important to leave these at 100%, 0%, 0%. And we come inside of the setting to another point where we have to go back to these, and I want to show that, of course. The offset itself has no influence to the result finally, but it changes the camera. We go to that later on. If you know that you need an offset, that's fine. Normally, my suggestion, leave it at 0. Have the image full size, no crop whatsoever. It's the best idea because any camera looks always exactly to this middle point in the frame here when we talk about standard lenses. So with these settings all perfectly arranged, we can go to the Calibrate tab. In the Calibrate tab, we have a lot of data, and I guess when you open that the first or the second time, it looks a little bit overwhelming, but you will see it clears out very fast what you can do and what you have to do. First of all, we have here some buttons: add line, add grid, add pin. These are the three elements where you can set information for the calculation, and that is pretty much all you have to do. There's nothing that you can do here more except for giving in some values later on. Standard is to start with the grid, but you can also start with a line. I start here with a grid, and you will see when you do it a few times, it's pretty simple and you need only to be very careful with that. So in a moment you click one of these edges here, there's a point here, you get a little magnifier. And this little magnifier can be set up in the settings here, magnifier zoom value and magnifier size. So you can have some influence through the appearance of these guys. I go back to calibrate and I set here my first point, and I suggest that you just think about how areas can change when they go into the background, like here. For example, when I go with my magnifier to this, I can't see here really the endpoint of that window, and when I go here, it's already gone. So this is not an option. Things change in perspective, so I have to find something that is not changing at all. And that is here maybe that line of the facade that is not obscured or dependent on two objects that cross each other, which is when you have 3D tracking in your skill set, then you know already what I have in mind. So let's grab here this point, for example, and then take the other point. Where you place them is pretty much up to you, and it should be always a square or a rectangle finally. Of course, it is perspective distorted, so you have to find something that is in the real world a rectangle, not in the picture. There it is, of course, in this way. So I try to find here now a line that works for me, and I place this here. I check here where I am with that. That's pretty much there. And I take some time because that's really the main information that you give to the calculation. If these points are not set very, very precisely, then the calculation will go wrong because it assumes the picture has a different perspective distortion. So nothing happens here. And the reason for that is because it has no idea where the orientation is. And we give that to this system here when we press down the Shift key and then click on one axis, and take a look. The color changes and I get here already something in yellow. I click again, I get green, and when I click again, I get blue. Once more, and I'm back to gray. Gray means no information to the system. Red is the x-axis and green is the y-axis. That means also that blue is the z or c-axis, whatever you prefer to have it. And you have seen that everything changes here dramatically. Yellow means it's acceptable. We are not really there yet, but we have already a camera focal length and we have a camera orientation. That is solved. But these yellow indicators gives you an idea that we are not really there yet. So we have here a vanishing point somewhere in the scene, and we have one from the green. So two vanishing points are done roughly, but as you can see, the green is pretty much parallel. I try to find here again the perfect point. If you don't find that, if you have not an option, go closer to it. The next one can be again a grid, and this time I go to this side here and I use what I can see, because here I have two objects, this column and the window. This is not an option here. This is not precise. This is precise because it's only one, and it's maybe not a good idea to use the tablet because every time I lift the pen it moves a little bit, but you get the idea how it works. And I use here exactly the same. Move these points then to this, rather smaller but more precise than big and sloppy. So I do this here very precisely and click to get green because that's the same, and then we need here a red axis. And you can see now the Y vanishing point has enough information. All these green lines finally, now we have 4 of them, create somewhere a vanishing point. Maybe 1 or 2 are not really there, but 2 finally have met very precisely, and that gives me here a value of 0.003, which is finally considered as green. Perfect. So the red and the blue axes don't have this so far. They are yellow, they are finely solved somewhere. I can put some more axes now into it, or a line, and I take maybe here the roof, always assuming that the construction people have worked perfectly. And I can click here again on blue, and you see, wow, another green one. That has helped a lot. And we get here a number, 35mm equivalent. That means a normal DSLR, or normal means based on the old film format. And that equals then a focal length of 27.38, whatever. Okay, let's try another line. And this time I place this here. And the more precise you are, the more precise will the project be. And you create here something that moves with you the whole time. So take your time and find the right edges. And I hope I have found them here. And when it's close, it indicates already red. One click and it gives you the color. That was not really helpful. So I take this out, delete line, try another one. And maybe I go somewhere here in the lower area. When it gets worse, rather go ahead and delete it instead of sticking with it because you have invested some work. That was now the one that I needed. And now everything is green except for the camera position. So first of all, what we need is, of course, some measurement in the scene. We can go now and click somewhere here and say, this is the measurement and I want to have that. I love to do this, for example, in a building like this. I go here to the corner and go down to this area here. Call this y-axis here. And I have destroyed here now something. So I was not really precise here with my work. I have to do that again. Now I'm here. This means the y is now very precisely aligned to all of that. And when I go here and I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stories high, then I can say known y, and I don't know that for sure, but I say, okay, every story is maybe 375 centimeters, and we have 6 of them. Sorry. So the idea is here, of course, not to pretend that I know how high that is, but when I want to have a scale in the whole scene, I say, okay, I go always with this building on this edge with the same measurement. 20 to 150 centimeters is exactly from that point to that point. So when I do another image, I try to remember the orientation with these axes, and I try to remember this size. And then things work out nicely because this size here finally creates the distance to the camera. If that would be here just a little model only, maybe only 22 centimeters high, then the camera would be much closer, of course. So, okay, we have one problem here. The camera has no position really. And that is then done with the pin here. And we get only one. We can't add more than one pin. The pin is mostly here in the middle. And we have to drag this. Is this orange little guy has also just a magnifier thingy on, and it has to jump here to this area, then it's fine. And you can see that this line, based on that I have given it a measurement, has some little strokes here on top and end. This is the indicator that this line here is measured by it. When you click again on it and you change your mind, you can do this, of course. And so this point here, the pin, has also a coordinate. And this coordinate anchors now the whole idea with the camera to the scene, to the world scene, 0, 0, 0. If you have a different idea, or if you place that maybe here on top, then this y value here would have the need to be 2250. So what to do now? You don't get any geometry from that. That would be nice, just to click and get here a plane. That is not available. what we need to do here, I would say save it. I don't do that here now, but save would be a good idea. And what I want to do is here, of course, to just take a look where we were with that image. And I think it was this one here. And we had 28 millimeters here as focal length. So I'm pretty close with my result here. I wouldn't go crazy to get exactly 28, because if the camera has really registered the lens perfectly, if the lens is perfectly and everything, and we have done a lens distortion here on this picture, which will change, of course, a little bit. And based on where I place then my grids has an influence in that as well. For me, this is fine, and everything else here is green and agrees with me here. The precision is nicely. Then we have two more tabs here, or buttons. Create camera mapping tag. When I click on this, I get to the camera here, the camera tag button. It's just a texture tag, and we will find this here as well. It is set up in the way we want to have it. I click on it so you can see it. The camera here is already in. You might like to give it a better name, PCam or whatever. What I like to do is to set this from both to front. So we have now through projection in it, and it has the material inside. The material itself is already prepared for you, and the texture here, the image that we have used, is in the luminance channel. It's not altered or something like that. It's just moved into it. So everything is fine. And now the scene is empty. Okay, let's click on that tag again. We get our picture back because we haven't set the image to be not shown or not be in foreground. And then we go here to the settings, and I want to just clear these guys. Offset magnifier, yes, we don't want to have them on the point, so we can see the point and the magnifier. We can uncheck this. And calculate pp for 3 VPS. Wow, what is that? So when we have an image that is not cropped, we have a middle point always in the picture, and that is very important. If we don't have that, if we use, for example, from a tilt shift lens, the shift parameters, the tilt will not work, the shift is in question here, then we can say use this method to calculate finally the shift amount. For that we need 3 VPS, vanishing points, and this vanishing points needs to be X, Y, and Z. So when we use only one grid, we get only 2 of them. For example, here, X and Y. For this to happen, that we can use shift lenses, or where we have a lens that is not axial, we need 3 of these axes to create vanishing points. Means non-parallel lines in the picture, but parallel lines in reality. They meet in infinity in a vanishing point. You remember that? I talked about this. And of course, each building that is not parallel to it will have different vanishing points. Very important to know. So I would say normally don't use this. Now you will ask, why is it then by default on? Because sometimes when you go to the camera, you will find here an offset even with a perfect image. So I flip this out here for a moment so you can see if I have introduced here now some trouble or not. So I go here and switch this on, and you can see here 5.8% and -654%. I take a look to the calibration, and I get a different result here, 2875. I don't know. Whenever I use this lens, and I have a lot of panoramas done with it, PTGui gives me always much smaller values for my offset in this lens here. So you can go with it or not. I normally don't like that. And I go with this value here as well as I would go with the other one. But the key here is, and I have to take a look to the camera here, of course. There's the camera. Sorry for that. I have to go here. So when I go now to my tag, to the settings, switch this on or off, you see the camera jumps here a little bit. And that is not what I want to have, as long as I know that this picture here is really non-cropped, has a perfect lens in it, and I don't want to have that we use something here to offset this. So when it is not offset, then the camera here itself is 0, 0, and I think it's much closer to the lens because I know my gear. You have to explore this, of course. It's very important. The next step is now that we create some geometry. I have done this with the geometry before, but I want to give you all the steps in case you haven't followed the whole series along. So my standard to start out is to take a cube, and that takes the selection here away from this. So I take here my cube, and I want to have this cube, of course, in a way that I can use it for this object here, which has the pin at 0, 0, 0. That means for me, I take here my coordinates to 100, copy that, and Command V into it. So what I have done now is that I can see that this object here has now its 0, 0 point exactly, whoops, at the world origin point. And as you might know, it's not that simple to scale cubes from this point. So I use here normally just a null object, place this underneath of the null, and then I go here from the model tool to the object tool and in scale mode. I want to see something, so I drag the texture tag, which has all the information from the camera and the picture and so on inside, so I can see a little bit. And now I go to the main view, rotate this around, and bring this down, make it smaller because the building is much higher. As you remember, 2250, this cube here is now 200, so we have some work in front of us. And with the null object selected, the scale is there. I go here maybe on this position of the axis so I can pull this faster out. And I try this again. So this is already over the top. So I take the cube now here to fine tune this. And let's say I'm happy with this area. I take the x-axis and move this here around. And you see there's already my stop point for this picture. And I go then here in this direction to this area. I grab this here maybe so I have a faster redraw or faster scale. Let's say the building ends here. So this is already my first projection here. Remember, this camera here needs urgently an restriction tag, protection tag, sorry. And what I like to do is put it to a new layer and lock the layer. That's more safe than the protection tag. What we have here now is a projection from this building to an object that has the same position as the relation from the practical camera to the real object had. And now the projection camera has the same relationship to this cube here. So when we want to check how good our result is, then we can go here to the front view, press H key, and we go then to the display guru shading. And one little trick, when you use the 1 button and click in an empty space, you can move this here to the border, and you can use here this border as a reference for straightness. So this looks very nice, and this edge here looks also very nice. Here we have a little bit of distortion in it, and not so much here. I expected a little bit more. And then we can go back to our foresight view. We go to this view, and normally it's the left side that we need. Press the H key, take a look here, nothing there. So we go to cameras, to left, and here it is, H key again. And this looks pretty much as I expected it, because it goes really, really far away. And sometimes we have to rotate the whole object a little bit to get this in the perspective that we want. Again, it was very small, and so I expected already a distortion because it gets here really small on the end. For that we have, of course, a different object here then in the scene. And then we want to have more from this picture here, of course. That means we go here now, drag another cube into the scene. Now I know where all of that is. I can go here to attributes, to objects, and to 2250. Maybe the other building is higher, but this gives me here from the start a nice height. This would be here then 1125 to have it pretty much on the floor. I assume that the floor is exactly in this way. So the C-axis is the one I have to drag, and I can't see a thing because it has no idea what to project. With a command or control click, I can duplicate this and I get here my projection back. What I need now is, of course, to go to the object again, and we have seen we need the Z or C-axis to expand this here more and more. And then we see the other building unfolds here slowly but carefully. And maybe I want to have some supportive axis here just for the fun. Move this to the back side. And I want to show you that, of course, a little bit better. So this here is now the building that I want to keep. And I need a little bit more space here to project this. And it's a small cube because I don't need to go around this and want to see the other side because I have no data on that. So now comes, of course, the $1 million question. Should I go with this area here and create tiny little geometry here? Is the camera move really unveiling that I have maybe here just a fake? And should I go here just with an alpha channel and cut this here out so I get a nice object border? This is up to you. I have shown you how that works. Just go with the projection camera, copy that, render it, paint this on it. You can do this even in the original picture and set the alpha channel into it. But here we want to go, of course, first through the projection calibrator or camera calibrator. And this gives me here already a nice little game here. So I can play with that and can set up maybe already a little camera. Now comes the question, of course. We want to have from the other image now exactly the same position that we have with this building now, but from the other picture. And the other picture needs to be set up then in the same way, that we have the same orientation for the axis, and we set in a vertical line here exactly then the origin point here to 0, 0, 0, and then we can replace this. It might happen that it is different, and I want to show you that, but I do this now in time-lapse and see you in a few seconds. So I start here with everything faded out, call up a new image here, and you can see I have problems with the tip of that building. I have to paint that maybe later in. I put my first grid into it, Y and X this time, and of course at this side Y and Z. Put some more lines in it until everything turns into green, and that is done soon. Another line, and everything is fine. Put my Y into it, put the length into it so I get the same scale as the other one. The pin is set and done. So now I need only my cube again, put my cube in, and this is my starting point. From there I could put more and more geometry into it. I think that worked very well. And of course, I have done this before. I switch off my first cube where I had the perspective from the other side. And in my first trial and error, I had switched the Z and the X axis. and then I had to put everything under a null object for this object and rotate it, or what I tried also to just flip that, click again on each axis, and everything was fine based on the 0, 0 point. This is of course a starting point, and so with that result going into the foresight view, I get already a much better result. And the truth is, the more I look perpendicular to a surface, the more I get a less undistorted result, of course. There is a border where I can pull out or undistort from a perspective such a long view as in the lower left area. This is, I think, already a good result. When you want to move something, the geometry and the camera that is responsible for that projection needs to be under the same null object. And then you move the top parent with everything in it, not a single one is left behind, because then the whole construction falls apart. So now you can place between these two cameras with a little wiggle room, of course, before and on the side, a nice camera path, as I've shown you that on the start. And what I want to do here is, of course, give you a little hint when you run into trouble with vertical images. So I start here with a new file. I don't want to destroy anything. Call up a camera, so you get used to the drill, and camera calibrator. Go to image, go to my mode here, and I have prepared here in JPEG to accelerate that process. And now we want to know, of course, what's all about here with that. And for that, I go here into calibrate mode, add a grid. And to make that very fast, I go here just to that window, and I go to this frame here, always assuming that everyone has done his work precisely on the construction company, which is not always the case. I worked in that area too long to believe anything else. And so let's believe that this here would be the y-axis, and this would be here the x-axis, and I have here an angle. So is that the camera that I have used for that? Let's have a look. So I have here 28 millimeters again, and that's pretty off. 44 is really not the way it should be. And I could, of course, finish here everything, and it's all yellow here. But the truth is, I have done it too often, and I don't want to waste more of your time here. So when you want to do something against this, you have to go back to image, and you can see here the film aspect ratio is not 1.5 at the moment. It is 0.667. So match with width, maybe. Doesn't help. Match with height gives me here 50%. Let's have a look what that does to the calibration here. 22. Half of that. Okay, I see a relation there, but that's not really the truth. We have 44 or 22. Full image gives me here 22 again. So what I've found with this kind of picture is, if you have a camera and you rotate along the axis, the picture inside would be the same, because the lens would not distort it to the left or the right. So at the moment, as I understand the whole process, is that when you have a picture that is horizontally laid out, that counts as 100%. So that would be here this one. But it's now vertically, so it's wider than when it would be horizontally. We see here an 0.667. And finally, when I type here in 66.7, click outside, I get something that comes very close to the lens that I have used, 29.55. And I was very sloppy here, I have to admit. But you see already, this is the way it works for me. If you have a problem with vertical images, have an eye on this one. And you can see here very clearly, in the moment I move the scale here, you move, of course, the angle of view or the focal length. That works, of course, analog to it. It's very clear. So this is my result. The film aspect ratio here for vertical pictures, not for horizontally, gives here exactly what we need. And this should be here set to 0. And let's try this as well. Calibrate it, gives the same result here. I think I can leave you now with this. We have nothing more to say here. And see you in the next part.